Triple safe pump systems require two discharge lines. If you tee the discharge lines together, you will not get twice the water out. This is because only so much water can flow through an 1.5-inch pipe. In fact, if two different size pumps tee into a single discharge line, the bigger pump will be pushing against the flow of water from the smaller pump and may not let any water from the smaller pump out at all. This is true with an M53 and Ultra sump. If both are running at the same time, you aren't getting any more water out because they're on the same discharge line. If you have two pumps in different corners of a basement, do not tee their discharge lines together. Run them out separately. There have been cases when a sump was installed, a new super sump was installed, and the discharge pipe was teed into an existing discharge line from another existing pump. Well, what the installer did not know was that there was no check valve on the existing pump. So what happens is the new pump turns on, it pumps the water into that existing line, and it goes down the line through the pump into the existing sump hole, which then has to pump to try to pump it out, and then this one's pumping more water in here. So if you tee into an existing line, you have to make sure there's a check valve on the other end of the line. It's not a good practice to tee in to an existing line anyway, because there's going to be a backup at this tee. So you want to run both discharge lines out independently. Once you're downstream of the ice guard, you might tee the discharge lines together, but at that point the water is in the larger pipe where it is running by gravity and not being pushed by the pump, so it does not cause back pressure on the pumps and lower their flow. Let's talk about head pressures. Head refers to the height you're pumping the water. If the basement wall is 8 feet high and the sump is about 2 feet deep, then you're pumping the water at a 10-foot head if the discharge line goes over the foundation wall. The higher you pump the water, the less gallons per minute you'll get out of the basement. For example, the maximum head an M53 will pump is 18 feet. So if we took an 18-foot section of pipe and stuck it into the pump, it would pump the water all the way up the 18-foot length of pipe and just hold it there, and no water would spill over the top of the pipe. Now, if we cut a foot off the pipe to make it 17 feet, the water would just trickle out over the top of the pipe. If we cut another foot off, the water would come out faster still, and so on and so on and so on. So at an 8-foot head, an M53 pump will pump 2,560 gallons per hour. An Ultra sump will pump 2,010 gallons per hour. An M98 pump will pump 3,900 gallons per hour. Horizontal pipe will take some energy for the pump to push water through, but not nearly enough to affect our pumping capacity like vertical head pressure will. And fittings, or turns in a discharge line, will cause resistance to the flow and slow it down a little, but not nearly like vertical head pressure. It would be helpful, however, to use as few fittings as possible and to use 45-degree elbows instead of 90-degree ones where you can, or 22.5-degree elbows instead of 45s. But don't fret over that too much. If you need to use a 90-degree elbow and you can't use a 45, just do it. There's such a thing as a sweep 90-degree fitting instead of a tight 90-degree fitting, and the sweep 90s will cause less resistance to the water flow. So how does this knowledge of head pressures affect us? Well, if we had to pump water up very high, like if we were in an elevator pit, or if we had to pump water over a very high wall, then we need a bigger pump. See, the maximum head that an M53 pump can pump in practice is 15 feet, where it'll only pump 1,500 gallons per hour. The maximum practical head pressure an M98 pump will pump is 19 feet, where it will pump 1,500 gallons per hour. So we may have to use a bigger pump. The biggest pump that can be plugged into 110-volt power is a Zoller M137, which has a maximum head of 26 feet, where it won't pump anything, and a maximum practical head of 23 feet, where it'll pump 1,500 gallons per hour. It pumps 4,680 gallons per hour at a 10-foot head and draws 10.8 amps. This M137 pump is very large, and you cannot fit it in a triple safe or a super sump with any other pumps. And remember, if you need a pump this big, you cannot back it up with an ultra sump because the ultra sump is smaller and should not pump more than 11 feet high as a practical matter. Still, if someone needs a pump, they need a backup so they don't get flooded when something goes wrong. The homeowner can back up a big pump like an M137 with a second M137 in case of pump failure and with an automatic generator in case of power failure. If you had to pump over a high wall, knowing that our pump capacity is reduced, we may opt for 2 pumps instead of 1. If the sump was located along the high wall and the site was sloped, we could run the discharge line horizontally in the building to run out at a lower elevation and eliminate running the discharge line that high at all. We can also use our knowledge of head pressures in a case where the homeowner had a lot of water and getting it out fast enough was an issue. Of course, we need multiple pumps on separate discharge lines in this case, but if we can take a few feet off the height we're pumping, it would help our flows. Is there a way we can run it so the discharge line won't go so high? Maybe out a different side of the house? Is there a lot of foundation showing so we can drill a hole through the concrete instead of through the rim joist and save some height? Whatever you can do to save some height will help you with the pump capacity if you need it. Thankfully, in most cases, you don't have to worry about it because the pumps are plenty strong enough. Discharge lines can be run across a basement ceiling with J-hooks. They can be run long distances horizontally if necessary. A trick, if there is no way to get the discharge line across a basement because of a sheetrock ceiling or other obstructions, is to run it out the side of the sump lid and under the floor in front of the water guard where the stone would normally be. Then you run up out of the floor on the other side to the ceiling where you want to exit it. Let's say you want to run the discharge line away from the rear right corner of the house. But let's say the sump needs to be located near the rear left corner of the basement, and there's no way to get across the basement with the pipe. You could run the discharge line outside, down out of the ice guard, and bury the pipe shallow against the foundation, and then down and away to the area that you want it to. Discharge lines are 3-inch or 4-inch pipe buried shallow in the ground, with about 2 to 3 inches of soil on top of them for grass to grow. Discharge lines should always be run downhill or at least level outside. If they go uphill, water will come out of the ice guard under normal conditions, and they will freeze for sure, more easily than they would otherwise because there's water sitting in the pipe. Never hook a sump discharge line to a septic system. You could flood it with water so that solids from the septic tank float up and enter the leaching fields and cost many thousands of dollars in damage to the septic system. And never hook a discharge line to a sewer. It's against building code because all that water goes to the city sewage treatment plant where they have to treat it, and that costs the taxpayers money forever. And if everyone did it, the sewage treatment plant would have way too much inflow during rains, and they would have to release it untreated into the rivers, lakes, or oceans. Besides that, another reason not to hook to a sewer system is that you have to remember that wastewater flows out of a house by gravity. The plumbing system has lots of openings in it, such as toilets, washing machine hookups, sinks, vents, and so on. A sump pump doesn't run by gravity. It forces the water into the system at many more feet per minute than it's accustomed to. If the water does not come out of somewhere it's not supposed to when you leave the house, it may in the future when there is a big rain and when the drain system is partially clogged with stuff from the toilets and so forth. If this happens, it's never pretty. So don't hook your discharge lines into a sewer system. Don't do it. We know of situations where a discharge line was hooked into the sewer system in the basement and it made water gush out of the kitchen ceiling on the second floor. Ask me how I know.